I know, a Windows 7 retro machine? You're taking this hobby too far, man. Well, let me tell you a story. When the free Windows 10 update was first offered, I decided to go for it because my primary Windows 7 machine was pretty well hashed. It was crashing a lot, and I was having a lot of issues with video editing and getting some newer games to run. I was also still running the OS on a 2TB Seagate SSHD or hybrid drive, basically a platter drive with a huge RAM cache, and I wanted to reinstall Windows on a small SSD. That way, if my OS gets screwed up, I can just wipe the drive and reinstall very quickly. The stars aligned, and it just made sense to do a fresh Windows 10 install on a new hard drive. I used Windows 10 at work and the Windows 10 technical preview before that, and didn't have any real problems with the operating system itself. Once I had migrated to Windows 10, I was without a Windows 7 PC, unless you count my media computer, which is a very specific low-capability machine. The reason for making a Windows 7 retro machine, and yes, I feel stupid saying that, isn't exactly compatibility like you might be thinking. When the technical preview of Windows 10 was made available, I installed it on a Core 2 Quad machine just to see what the deal was. While I had a Windows 10 machine, I decided to run some experiments on games to see, will it 10? And mostly they did, except for Rainbow Six Lockdown, which uses Star Force copy protection like a lot of other mid-2000s games. I'd read that Windows 10 was not going to allow for that older style copy protection for security reasons, which I took to mean the game simply wouldn't work. Nope. The game installed more or less as you'd expect, but threw a bunch of errors when trying to start. What can you do, I said, and shut down the computer. It never started again. Apparently the Star Force copy protection worked some shenanigans on the boot sector or the Windows 10 system directory so badly that the operating system was unrecoverable. Windows 10 went into an endless loop of booting, failing to boot, checking itself for errors, running a system repair, and then restarting until I pulled the plug and just put XP back on the box. Which brings us to Phobos, a budget Windows 7 build put together using largely leftover parts. I've been wanting to try out the current AMD experience for a while, and the AMD Athlon X4 860K seemed like a good value. It uses the FM2 Plus socket, so you can get a bunch of cheap micro ATX boards with pretty decent feature sets, and it's supposed to be a great overclocker, which is something I've never really done before. I paired it with an MSI Grenade micro ATX motherboard and had to buy a cheap video card because the 860K has no onboard graphics. I went with an ultra-cheap PowerColor Radeon HD 6950 because it was on a shell shocker deal on Newegg when I got the 860K, and it benchmarks way higher than any other card I could have got for the same money. The card seems to work just fine, but I will say that the fan shroud is the cheapest feeling I've ever seen on a video card. I'm not sure I would buy another PowerColor product after this. When it comes to cases, I love Corsair products because they're very easy to work with, feature-rich, and of decent quality for the money. My primary rig is built in a Monstrous Vengeance C70, which is cool because A, it looks like an ammo can, and B, it has lots of fans. Zing! I went with a Corsair Carbide Air 240, which is the coolest looking micro ATX case I've ever seen, and the dual chamber design kinda fascinated me. All Corsair cases I've ever worked with make cable management very easy, which is good because I'm not good at it and all of my builds end up knee-deep in assorted lengths of wire. The RAM was 8 gigs of leftover slow DDR3 I salvaged from an OEM desktop, and the power supply was the old semi-modular Corsair CS750M that used to be in my main case before I upgraded to a Seasonic 80 Plus Gold. I installed Windows 7 Home Premium 64-bit from the retail copy I've had forever onto an older SSD that was in my Vio laptop before it washed up on the shores of hell. Because I had most of the parts lying around, this is a very inexpensive build, although it would also work pretty well as an introductory build for a budget gaming PC. In a short time, the build has had many iterations. Originally, I put it together with the junkyard cheap AMD stock cooler, which literally has not a gram of copper in it, and ran the included 3 case fans on a 3-pin fan splitter, since the MSI motherboard has only 2 fan headers. To get more overclocking headroom on the 860K, I later installed a Corsair all-in-one H60 liquid cooler. It's not going to live in there, it's just getting some experience with the AMD before I switch it to the i5 on my primary machine. I chose the H60 because it's cheap and the smallest Corsair offers. I've seen some builds that put crazy huge radiators in the Carbide 240, but I wasn't in the mood to try it. Corsair recommends using the included static pressure PWM fan as an intake to push fresh air past the radiator and into the case. I'm not good at following directions, and I didn't want to introduce super hot overclocked air into a tiny case, so I instead configured it in push as an exhaust, with the 3-way fan header powering the 2 front intakes and the H60 pump. This worked fine for the stock clock of 3.7 GHz with a 4.0 turbo, but when I clocked the CPU to a moderate OC of 4.4 GHz, it got mighty toasty. Back to the drawing board. The second configuration used two fans in push-pull, still as an exhaust. The push fan was the static pressure optimized fan that came with the H60, and the pull fan was one of the airflow optimized fans that came with the case. This left only one intake fan on the front of the case, another of the airflow optimized stock case fans. This setup was perfectly cromulent for the OC of 4.4 GHz, though the CPU was warm, and after running the computer for a few minutes, so was my office. But I just can't leave well enough alone. I'd ordered some Linus Tech Tips Special Edition Noctua NFF12 fans, and was spoiling to use them for something. Noctua makes high quality, albeit expensive fans, and I've never bought a single one of them because they're hideous. The brown fan blades I don't mind, but the chassis is the same hearing aid beige as the Rover James, and the combination looks like a misaimed attempt at steampunk. The Linus Tech Tips versions are the NFF12 static pressure optimized fans, but in black and orange, which is a combination that I can't help but love, even though I did get my degree from U of O. Go Ducks. Also, the color scheme is a lot like my website. Noctua fans come with a bunch of goodies, including low noise adapters to make the fans slower and quieter, and also a nice 4-pin PWM splitter. It's almost worth buying a few of these just to have those odds and ends for other projects. The new fan configuration used both Noctua fans running on the CPU fan header with the splitter and low noise adapters on each, in push-pull on the radiator exhausting hot air at the top of the case. This leaves the pump on a dedicated fan header, which is very useful. As far as I can tell, it's advantageous to give the pump 100% power all the time, so the coolant never stops circulating. If you're splitting the fan header, that means your case fans will also run at 100% and the noise will be unbearable. I was pretty stoked about this setup until I turned it on and the computer instantly combusted. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration. Temps were okay in the BIOS, but after landing in the Windows 7 desktop, the socket temp shot up to an infernal 75 degrees centigrade in about 30 seconds before I shut down. I thought maybe the Noctua fans weren't cutting it, likely story, so I dialed the OC back to 4.2 GHz and tried again. Same result. I posted about this on Facebook before I'd figured out what the cause of the issue was. I dialed the OC all the way back to 4.0 GHz, basically putting the processor into perma turbo but not going any farther than that, and temps were high but stable. What had actually happened was the case fan header looked like it was set to a pretty aggressive fan curve that would keep the pump supplied with enough juice, but it turns out that MSI Commander, the mainboard software, was lying to me. The case fan header was actually set to a stable 25% speed, which wasn't allowing the pump to circulate water through the radiator. Once I used the actual BIOS to set the fan curves, 100% for the pump and 75% for the CPU fans, it's working just fine. That 75% for CPU fans sounds loud, but remember the low voltage adapters are cutting that by a significant amount. Also, putting the fans in push-pull wasn't really yielding any benefits, so I switched one of them to be an intake fan for the case. I haven't bothered cranking the overclock back up because the machine is performing well enough for what I've wanted to do so far. In some games of an appropriate age for Windows 7, it works just fine, like Mass Effect 1, aka Mass Effect only as far as I'm fucking concerned. And Divine Cybermancy, aka, hey, what if we made Deus Ex in the Source Engine? Oh god, no, this was a disaster, this game is fucking dogshit, too late, just ship it. So what is in store for Phobos? And yes, my primary computer is named Marathon, and this one is next to it and named Phobos because yes, I'm a huge Marathon nerd, and yes, you should feel sorry for my aggressively single existence. Well, my primary computer is still running a pair of EVGA GTX 660 superclocked 2GB cards in SLI, which is fine because my graphics card isn't an extension of my inadequate junk. I own a gun for that. I'm not super motivated to get a new graphics card because video games are uncommonly bad right now and I can't justify the expense. But when I do, one of the GTX 660s can go in the Windows 7 rig, which will improve performance significantly over the HD 6950. The Windows 7 Retro machine basically fills a few crucial roles. Number one is compatibility with older but not that old games, which is just a touch better than Windows 10. Number two is getting capture for games that don't play nice with NVIDIA Shadowplay, because the AverMedia game broadcaster in my primary rig can record the video output directly. And number three is improving on the quality of NVIDIA Shadowplay, because in order to make capturing and playing on the same rig possible, Shadowplay macro blocks noticeably. The final use of Phobos will be when my main computer is no longer even fast enough to play upcoming games and simultaneously capture the footage with Shadowplay. When that happens, I'll have to move the capture card over to the Windows 7 box and basically reverse my current capturing workflow. More than being a useful utility computer, the Phobos build was an excuse to buy parts and put them together, specifically overclockable AMD parts, since the last AMD machine I owned was my first ever computer built on an AMD Duron 600. There's no rest for the living, so the specs and setup of this machine will definitely keep changing. I also painted the metal grille on the top and front a shiny aluminum color for fun and a bit of visual punch. Stay tuned for more maniacal rantings on the subject of video games and computer shit. Thanks for watching. If you're sick of all this marathon business, I've sprinkled Doom references throughout this video. Go back and find them all to unlock a bitchin' achievement. Doom 64.